My mother? She's just a placeholder until the paperwork clears. That's what my son Daniel said at my husband's funeral, loud enough for me to hear. My name is Helen Whitmore. And that sentence was the moment I buried more than my husband. I buried the illusion that my son still loved me. Let me start from the beginning. My husband, Raymond Whitmore, died 2 weeks ago after a short but brutal illness. At 61, I was now a widow. And at his funeral, I wore the navy blue dress he said made me look like a queen. Not to mourn but to remind everyone, especially Daniel and his wife Lauren, that I was still standing. That I was still watching. Raymond had built his company, Whitmore Development, from the ground up. What began as a one-man construction gig in the town of Harrington Hills became a sprawling empire. Luxury buildings, business parks, and commercial investments spanning 3 states. By the time he passed, his estimated net worth was $55 million. And now vultures were circling. Daniel is 37. He's got his father's chin, but none of his backbone. The moment he married Lauren 5 years ago, everything changed. Suddenly, I was no longer mom. I was her. The inconvenient obstacle standing between them and the Whitmore fortune. At the funeral, I stood by the casket, accepting handshakes and empty condolences. My spine was straight. My eyes dry. That's how Raymond would have wanted me. Composed, proud, deliberate. Mrs. Whitmore, you have our deepest sympathy, said Judge Carmichael, a longtime family friend. Raymond was a titan. But you're steel wrapped in silk. He always said so. I nodded graciously. But my focus was already drifting to the back row of the chapel. Daniel was whispering with Lauren, her long red nails flicking at her phone screen between fake sniffles. She wore designer black but not mourning. It was the kind of outfit you wear when you expect to be photographed inheriting millions. I watched them with growing fury. Raymond always said, "People show their true colors when money's involved. Watch closely, Helen." I did. And what I saw at that funeral was betrayal. The reception was held at our estate. 12,000 square feet of polished stone, glass, and memories. It was the house we built together. Every corner told a story. I was in the kitchen directing the catering staff when I heard it. Daniel's voice just outside the door. "We'll liquidate the Lakewood property first. That alone is $6 million. And the rest? Well, Mom's not going to put up a fight." Lauren laughed. "Please. She's still using a flip phone. She probably doesn't even know half of what she owns." Then he said it. "She's just a placeholder until the paperwork clears." My hand clenched around the silver tray I was holding. I set it down deliberately and walked back into the reception, smiling, silent, lethal. They thought I was clueless. They had no idea. Daniel changed after marrying Lauren. She's sharp in a sterile way, the kind of woman who calculates worth in carats and square footage. First, I tried to welcome her. I even hosted their rehearsal dinner at our country home. She smiled through her teeth and made a mental inventory of every antique in the dining room. Raymond saw it too. "She's not marrying him," he told me quietly one night. "She's investing." He wasn't wrong. After the wedding, Daniel's visits grew shorter, colder. He took over more operations at Whitmore Development, but started making decisions behind Raymond's back. Bad ones. Risky expansions, speculative investments. He was acting like he already owned the company. Raymond didn't say much. He watched. He took notes. And now, with Raymond gone, Daniel assumed the empire was his. He was wrong. That evening, I met privately with Raymond's attorney, Franklin Yates. He's an old friend, precise and discreet. "We need to go over the documents," he said. Raymond left. Very specific instructions. That piqued my interest. We scheduled the meeting for Tuesday. He insisted on handling everything in person. Before I left, he said one more thing. "Helen, Raymond protected you. Thoroughly. You may find his arrangements surprising." Surprising? I returned to the empty house. Our house. Every room echoed with silence. But I wasn't grieving anymore. I was preparing. Daniel and Lauren thought they had the upper hand. They had no idea what Raymond had planned. And neither did I, not yet. But soon. They'd both learn. On Tuesday at precisely 2 p.m., I walked into Yates & Associates, the law office Raymond had trusted for over 2 decades. I'd been here many times before. Board meetings, property filings, even holiday charity events, but this time felt different. Franklin greeted me himself. "Right this way, Helen." He led me into a private conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Harrington Hills. Everything in the room was polished, expensive, and heavy with silence. On the table was a single leather folder, thick and labeled in gold. Raymond Whitmore, final will and personal letters. Franklin poured coffee, waited until I was settled, then sat across from me. "Your husband was meticulous. He left nothing to chance. This," he tapped the folder, "was prepared months before his passing. He updated it again 2 weeks before his final hospitalization." He opened the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was handwritten across the front. I took it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. 3 pages. All in Raymond's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry, not just for leaving, but for knowing that what comes next will test you more than grief ever could. You were never just my wife. You were my partner, my compass, my clarity in every storm. And now I need you to be all that again, not for me but for yourself. I've watched Daniel. I've seen the man he's become. I wanted to believe it was just immaturity or stress. I hoped marriage would bring out the best in him. But Lauren." She sharpened his edges instead of softening them. "I see it clearly now. You were right to worry. And now you must act. He cannot be allowed to destroy what we built. I didn't work 40 years to hand everything over to a man who only sees $signs. And I won't allow him to treat you like an afterthought. So I've rewritten the will. Daniel will inherit $1. That's it. Nothing more. And a letter explaining exactly why. Everything else, the properties, the accounts, the company shares, the trusts, all of it goes to you. There are protections in place. Franklin will explain everything. It's airtight. He can contest if he wants, he'll lose. Let him try. He needs to learn what it means to build something instead of waiting to inherit it. I know this isn't the peaceful retirement we planned, but you are stronger than any of them know. You always have been. Use that strength now. Take what's yours. And if they push back. I love you. And I always will. Raymond." I read the letter 3 times. My hands were shaking but my heart was steady. Franklin cleared his throat. "Helen, what your husband did. It was bold. And completely legal. We've documented everything. There are recordings, financial logs, and emails outlining Daniel's behavior over the past 18 months. I blinked. "Recordings?" Franklin nodded. "Raymond began keeping records after Daniel tried to pressure him into retirement. There are meetings, dinner conversations, even one where Daniel jokingly refers to you as a temporary trustee." My jaw tightened. So Raymond knew the full extent of it. And he'd planned accordingly. Franklin continued. "The company shares have already been transferred into a holding trust. Under your control. All property titles were moved last week. Offshore accounts have been established to protect liquid assets. As of right now, Daniel and Lauren believe they're in line for a windfall. They're not." I couldn't help it, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of vengeance. It was relief. They'll find out at the public will reading? Yes. In exactly 5 days. Until then, everything remains quiet. That was Raymond's final instruction. Let them believe they've won. I stood, gathered the letter, and shook Franklin's hand. "Thank you." As I walked out of that office, I felt taller. Not just because of the money, but because my husband, even in death, had seen me, had trusted me, had believed in me. The day after meeting with Franklin, I walked through our estate with new eyes. This wasn't just my home now, it was my stronghold. Every painting, every marble countertop, every acre of land was mine. Not inherited, chosen, given, by the man who knew what was coming. Daniel and Lauren had no clue. They came over that evening, uninvited, just checking in, as they called it. Daniel wore that tight, performative smile, the one he reserved for press photos and real estate investors. Lauren, in her beige trench coat and oversized sunglasses, looked around the foyer like she was shopping. "Mom," Daniel said with false warmth, "we thought maybe we should start going over some of Dad's business holdings. You know, just to get ahead of things." I nodded slowly. "You're concerned about the company?" "Of course. I mean, Dad built Whitmore Development with legacy in mind. I want to make sure we keep everything moving forward. We should probably meet with the board soon." Lauren chimed in. "And maybe look into liquidating some of the personal assets. The Aspen property, for example. It's a bit much for one person, don't you think?" She smiled sweetly like she was suggesting a spa day, not slicing through my life. I folded my hands on the dining room table. "Actually, I've already spoken with Franklin. The estate is well protected. There's nothing to worry about." Daniel's smile faltered. "You talked to Franklin?" "He insisted." Raymond left detailed instructions. They exchanged a glance. Lauren was the first to break the silence. "Well, I'm sure you'll let us know when things need our input." "Oh, I will," I said, standing. "But for now, I think it's best we let Franklin handle the transitions. I trust him." The tone was clear. This wasn't a team project. They left soon after, polite, forced, visibly rattled. Good. Let the suspense gnaw at them. That night, I pulled out the folder Franklin had given me. Inside were copies of Raymond's documents, the trust agreements, property titles, offshore accounts. Everything now belonged to me. But it was the second envelope that shook me. Labeled, T.O. Daniel, to be opened after will reading. I didn't open it, but I held it for a long time. Raymond's final words to his son weren't mine to read, but I imagined what they said. I remembered the man Raymond was, fair, firm, impossible to fool. And I knew whatever those pages held, they would be devastating in their simplicity. Daniel had made one mistake too many. Over the next few days, I played the part of the grieving widow perfectly. I took calls from old friends, sent thank you notes for the flowers, even attended a charity gala Raymond had RSVP'd to before his death. I wore the black velvet dress he loved. People whispered how put together I looked. They didn't know I was preparing for war. I visited the Lakewood property and walked the grounds alone. Raymond had loved it here. The quiet, the pine trees, the way the lake caught the sunset like molten gold. He wanted to retire here. So did I. Now I could. Or I could sell it. Or give it to charity. Or burn it to the ground and rebuild it in glass and steel. It was mine. The night before the will reading, I got a call from Lauren. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Is there something we should know before tomorrow?" "Yes," I said calmly. "You should know what kind of man your husband's father really was." She didn't answer. Just hung up. Perfect. Let them stew. Let them imagine every scenario except the one that's about to unfold. Because tomorrow morning, in a room full of witnesses and lawyers, my son is going to hear the words that will shake his foundation. And I'll be sitting across from him, not as the grieving mother, not as the grieving wife, but as the woman his father entrusted with everything. The will reading was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp at Franklin Yates' private conference suite. I arrived 15 minutes early. Raymond always said, "Punctuality is a silent power." I wore a deep gray suit with a simple silver brooch, the one he gave me on our 30th anniversary. Daniel and Lauren arrived at exactly 9:58. Not a second early. Not a second late. They were dressed like royalty preparing for coronation. Lauren's designer heels clicked confidently across the marble floor, her lips set in a practiced half-smile. Daniel's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning for control. But the sweat at his collar betrayed him. They expected a show. They were about to get one. Franklin didn't waste time. "Thank you all for coming. As executor of the estate of Raymond Charles Whitmore, I will now read his last will and testament. Please refrain from interruptions until the reading is complete." He opened the document and began. "I, Raymond Charles Whitmore, being of sound mind and full legal capacity, declare this to be my final will." I watched Daniel. He leaned forward slightly. Lauren's hand tightened around his arm. Franklin continued. "To my beloved wife, Helen Ann Whitmore, My partner in life, love, and legacy. I leave the entirety of my estate. A pause. Not for effect. Just to let the silence settle. All properties, trusts, business shares, holdings, accounts, valuables, and intellectual property. In full, with no contest permitted. Daniel blinked. Lauren inhaled sharply. Franklin kept reading. To my son, Daniel Marcus Whitmore, I leave $1 dollar. He reached into the folder and held up a single dollar bill, neatly taped to a card. And a letter. To be read in private at his discretion. The silence was no longer polite. It was violent. Daniel shot to his feet. This is a joke. Tell me this is a joke. Franklin didn't flinch. It is not. It is legally binding. Multiple witnesses, video documentation, and medical certification verifying Mr. Whitmore's full mental capacity at the time of signing. All requirements have been fulfilled. Lauren's voice cut through the air. This is theft. Franklin's eyes narrowed. No, Mrs. Whitmore. This is planning. Daniel looked at me, no longer as a son looking at his mother, but as a man realizing he was never the main character in this story. You knew about this, he spat. Yes, I replied calmly. I knew. You helped him do it. No, I said. He didn't need help. He needed clarity. You gave it to him. Franklin stood. This concludes the reading. All documentation is now official. Ms. Whitmore, you and I will meet privately to discuss asset distribution. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore, you may take your letter and your dollar on the way out. They didn't leave right away. They sat there for a moment, stunned, as if someone had pulled the floor out from under them and they were still falling. I stood, smoothed my suit, and walked to the door. Just before stepping out, I turned back. Daniel. He looked up. You were right, you know. I was a placeholder. But you never asked yourself what I was holding. And now, I'm holding everything. I left them there, in the room they thought they would own. That evening I sat on the balcony of the Lakewood property, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sun dip into the water. The air was still, quiet, whole. I wasn't angry. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't vindicated. I was free. Everything Raymond had built, everything we had sacrificed for, was still intact, still protected, still meaningful. And it belonged to the one person who understood its value. Not Daniel. Not Lauren. Me. And tomorrow I'd begin deciding exactly what to do with it all. 2 days after the will reading, I heard the first knock at the estate gate. I watched from my upstairs sitting room as Daniel stood there. No driver, no suit, no Lauren. Just him. Alone, fidgeting. He buzzed again. I didn't move. I let him wait 27 minutes before sending Caroline, our house manager, to open the gate. When he came inside, I was seated in the solarium sipping black tea. I didn't stand when he walked in. I didn't smile. I didn't offer him a drink. I waited. He sat down slowly, awkwardly, like someone entering a boardroom for a meeting they were clearly unprepared for. You didn't return my calls, he said. I was busy, I replied. Doing what? He snapped. Planning your next move? Cutting me out of more? No. Just living. Something you haven't mastered. He shifted. Look, I read the letter. I said nothing. He pulled it from his jacket. It was creased now. Handled too many times. His voice dropped. He wrote that he loved me. But he said I lost his trust. Still I waited. He said I became someone he couldn't recognize. That I let money talk louder than family. That I treated you like a barrier instead of a foundation. My grip tightened on the porcelain cup, but I didn't respond. Then Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes heavy. I didn't expect this, Mom. Any of it. That's obvious, I said calmly. His mouth twisted. Was it really that bad? Was I that blind? You were worse, I answered, voice firm now. You didn't just betray your father. You dismissed him while he was alive. You dismissed me while I was standing in front of you. I didn't know, he murmured. You didn't want to know, I said. You thought you'd already won. He sat back, staring into the distance. Lauren left, he said after a pause. That caught me off guard. I blinked. Excuse me. Yesterday. Packed a bag and said she wouldn't waste time with a man who couldn't secure his own legacy. He laughed bitterly. Apparently, my value expired when the inheritance did. I remained quiet. I tried to call Franklin. He didn't answer. I tried the board. They said you'd already taken the executive seat. They said they're relieved. I nodded. They should be. He slumped forward. So what now? That depends, I said. What are you asking me? He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. I don't want money. I want to fix things. I studied his face, his posture, his tone. And I believed him. About 40%. But 40% was better than zero. Then start where your father did, I said. Work. Earn. Prove. Doing what? Whatever I tell you. That evening I had Franklin transfer a minor account, one of our older properties in the industrial district, into a new business shell. I put Daniel's name on the paperwork. He called 2 days later when he realized the place was a rundown logistics warehouse. I thought you said earn, not punish. I did, I said. Let's see if you remember how to build instead of just take. Over the next 2 weeks things shifted. Slowly. He called less to ask for things and more to report progress. I still heard excuses. I still sensed the old arrogance, but something was changing. He hired his own team. Showed up early. Fixed the plumbing himself the first week, because he wanted to understand what kind of building it really was. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. And that was more than I expected. One morning as I stood in the kitchen drinking my tea, Caroline handed me an envelope. It was from Lauren. Inside, 1 page. A shame, really. He was charming once. You should have let him inherit. He might have stayed lovable. There was no signature. No return address. Just a waxy perfume scent and a single lipstick mark on the fold. I didn't tell Daniel. Some lessons don't need to be taught twice. Weeks passed. I sold 2 of our commercial properties and donated part of the profit to Raymond's Education Foundation. I put another $2 million into a discretionary scholarship fund for low-income women in engineering, something I knew would have made him proud. I also had the Aspen property renovated, but I didn't sell it. I turned it into a non-profit retreat for women rebuilding their lives after loss. I named it Raise Edge. Daniel heard about it from the papers. He didn't ask why. He just sent a 1-line email. He would have loved that. By mid-fall, Harrington Hills began to turn gold. The trees, the air, even the light seemed softer. Not in sadness but in settlement. As if the town itself had caught its breath after a long bitter wind. The same way I had. Daniel called on a Monday afternoon. No assistant. No agenda. Can I stop by? He asked. Yes, I said. But just you. He arrived looking different. Not poor. Not broken. Just quieter. The expensive watches were gone. The designer loafers replaced by worn boots. And for the first time in years his shirt was wrinkled and he didn't seem to care. I led him into Raymond's old study, now mine. The bookshelves were still lined with hardbacks about business, legacy, and real estate law. But I'd added new titles too, about boundaries, grief, and survival. He stood there a moment, then placed something on the desk. It was the original dollar bill Franklin had given him during the will reading, still taped to the letter. I don't want it hanging over me, he said. You could have thrown it away. I didn't. I opened the envelope again. I hadn't read the letter before. It wasn't mine. But now Daniel was offering it to me. I pulled the paper out. The handwriting was Raymond's, neat, deliberate, final. Daniel, if you're reading this, then you know I left you almost nothing. And that was the kindest thing I could do. You've been handed everything your whole life. And somewhere along the way you mistook gifts for guarantees. You stopped asking how to build. You started asking how much. Your mother deserved better than that. So did I. This isn't about punishment. It's about giving you the freedom to become someone again. Someone who builds instead of inherits. If you want to lead someday, start by following the people who earned their place. If you want to own, start by working. If you want to make us proud, make something that doesn't have my name on it. Helen holds the keys now, and she's earned every one of them. Don't beg her for shortcuts. Earn your way back. Dad. When I looked up, Daniel's eyes were wet, but his hands were steady. I started meeting with small business owners, he said. Real people. Ones who started with nothing. It's humbling. Good, I said. You needed that. I don't want to take the company from you, Mom. You can't. I know, he said. That's not what I meant. I want to learn again. Like I used to. Back when Dad would walk me through spreadsheets on Sunday mornings. I studied him for a long moment. I won't open every door for you, I said. But I won't lock all of them either. He nodded. I'm not asking for the keys. I'm asking for a map. Later that evening, I walked through the house alone. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not hollow. Just quiet. At peace. I paused in the hallway near the family portraits. I'd rearranged them recently. Moved Raymond's image to the center. Put my own beside his. Daniel's photo, the one from his MBA graduation, was still there. But I placed it farther down the wall near the entry. A reminder that legacy isn't given. It's earned. A week later, I hosted a board meeting at Whitmore Development. For the first time in the company's history, the table was evenly split between men and women. Half of them were under 40. All of them had built something of their own before earning a seat. Daniel attended. He sat in the back. Took notes. Didn't speak until spoken to. When the meeting ended, he walked up to me and said, "That was the most I've learned in an hour since college." I didn't smile, but I nodded. And that was enough. The Aspen Retreat opened that winter. We hosted 15 women in the first season. Survivors, caretakers, rebuilders, all of them warriors in cardigans and tired shoes. Each one left with something they didn't arrive with clarity. The board asked what we wanted to engrave above the fireplace. I chose one of Raymond's old sayings. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who stands taller because of you. It's been 8 months since the will was read. Lauren never resurfaced. Daniel now runs his logistics project full-time and volunteers twice a week at the Downtown Youth Business Center. He still carries the dollar in his wallet. I've never asked why. And me? I still walk through the house every morning with a cup of tea, watching the light shift across the floor like it's trying to remember something.